Hi there, it's Thomas George and welcome to this FL Studio 20 beginners tutorial. So in this video, we're going to show on screen step by step the essentials of FL Studio so you can make your own music. This video was actually taken from my complete FL Studio course. If you'd like full access to this course, then be sure to check out the link below this video. Hello and welcome to this lecture where we're going to be looking at a brief overview of the interface in FL Studio. So we're going to quickly have a look at the channel rack, the playlist, the mixer, piano roll and browser. As FL Studio is slightly different to other digital audio workstations, I'm just going to briefly show you the layout of this software. So this may look a little bit confusing at the moment, but hopefully after this lecture, you'll start to understand how FL Studio works. One thing to note is you will always have a hint panel in the top left of FL Studio. So if you ever get confused, you can always look over here. For example, here we have the master volume and master pitch, and it tells us this in the hint panel just here. One other thing to note, which is really awesome, is if you press F1, or if you're using a Mac, function F1, as long as you're connected to the internet, this will bring up the FL Studio reference manual. But not just that, it will automatically go to the chapter of the area that you have selected in FL Studio. So for example, right now we have the channel rack and step sequencer selected. But as you can see, it opens up on this page and it shows us loads of information about this. I'm just going to close this now. And now I'm going to go over the 5 main sections in FL Studio. First is this channel rack here. And this is where samples and instruments that you're using for your project are stored. And this is also a sequencer and is where we start to write some of our music. We'll look at this in a lot more detail later on, but just so you know, this first box here is the channel rack. This is one of FL Studio's unique features that make it different to other digital audio workstations. And also we can open and close the channel rack with this button over here. So if you don't see your channel rack, just click on this icon and it will appear. The next section here is the playlist window. You may also know this as the arrangement window. So this is really where you arrange your song. And we can select this window by clicking on it or pressing Shift and Tab. And just to show you again, because we have this new area selected, we can open up the FL Studio reference manual. And you can open this up by pressing function F1 on a Mac or F1 on Windows. And you can see here in the reference manual, the playlist chapter is open. We can also open up the playlist window by pressing this button here. The most common way to create music in FL Studio is to actually create patterns in the channel rack and then arrange these different patterns in the playlist window. Okay, and another important window which we don't actually have open at the moment is the piano roll window. So if we click on this button here, we can open and close the piano roll window. This again is a very important area as you use the piano roll to actually write and sequence MIDI information. We'll go into the piano roll and the other sections in a lot more detail later on, but I just want to quickly show you the main sections in FL Studio before we dive deep into this course. Okay, and going over to the left, we have the browser section. So this is actually a file section that allows you to find different plugins, samples and instruments on your computer to use in FL Studio. And the next section I'm going to briefly talk about is the mixer. So this is where we can send our audio into individual channels and also add audio effects to these channels. So some of these effects may include EQ, compression, delay, reverb, and many others. Okay, so as you've already seen up here, these icons in the toolbar are shortcuts to actually open and close the main different windows. So this one here will actually open and close the mixer, and the one to the right will open and close the browser. Okay, so another important area that we're going to quickly look at is the transport area. And this is how you can control playback for your song. As you can see here, we have the pattern and song modes. So if you have pattern selected, this will actually play back a pattern that you have selected in your channel rack. For example there, it played back the drums that we had selected in our channel rack. However, if we want to play the song back that's in our playlist window, we will have to change this to song mode. And now if we press play with the play button, it will play back our song. There's also a record button next to this, but we're going to look at recording later on in this course. As you can see, there are many other features and icons in this toolbar at the top, but this lecture really is to just go over briefly the main interface. Let's go over this once more. We have the channel rack where we create our patterns. Then we have the playlist window where we arrange these patterns. And then we have the mixer where we can mix and add effects to our tracks. Then we have the piano roll where we can type in and sequence MIDI. And then over on the left, we have the browser where we can access relevant files for FL Studio. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of this interface. Now we're going to have a look at some of these features in more detail. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the channel rack. And this is where we store our different instruments. So for example, when you open up FL Studio, you'll have these 4 instruments here. So the 2 most important things I'm going to look at now are the sound source and the step sequencer. So if you click on the name of the channel here, it will open up the sound source. So this is called the wrapper. And if I click on this audio wave here, it'll play back the sample. And to the right is our step sequencer. Each of these steps represents a 16th note. So here, if I add some steps, and I go up to the transport section and choose pattern and then press play, you'll be able to hear the kick drum. Okay, so there we've actually created our first pattern. We can name our pattern by going over to this drop down arrow here and going down to rename. Just going to call this one kick. And over here, we can also select a color, then hit enter. Okay, so now I'm actually going to create a new pattern. And we can do so by clicking this plus button over here. And we're going to call this one kick and snare. Okay, you may notice that the kick drum steps have disappeared in the channel rack. That's because the channel rack is now displaying the information for our new pattern. So if I go over here and select our first pattern, you can see there that the kick has reappeared. And if we go back to the next pattern, kick and snare, it's disappeared. So as you can see there, the musical information in the channel rack has reset. So if I press play now, you won't be able to hear anything. Okay, so now I'm just going to draw in a simple kick and snare beat. So to draw in, just left click, and to delete, right click. So I just made a couple of mistakes there and I just right clicked to delete them. So if we play this back now, we can hear there our second pattern. So if I click between the 2 patterns here, we can see that kick and snare has the snare as well. Okay, so if you want to add a new channel to your channel rack, there's a couple of ways to do so. One is by accessing the browser. You can select this button to see or hide the browser. And you can scroll down and find musical samples under packs. So for example here, I'm just going to drag in a ride cymbal just below the other channels. And now we have the ride cymbal in our channel rack. You can also select this plus button here, and this will allow you to add a new instrument. So for example, I could choose a synthesizer. And here I've just opened up the Flex synthesizer, which is a synth available on all versions of FL Studio 20. I'm just going to create a new pattern over here. This time I'm going to call it chords. Okay, so on the step sequencer, you can't actually choose the pitch. So what you can do is open up the piano roll. To do so, right click on the channel name and select piano roll. I'm just going to delete that note by right clicking and now draw in a chord. Okay, you may have noticed as well that the step sequencer has turned into a preview of the piano roll. And if we play this back, you'll be able to hear the chord. Okay, so that's just a brief overview of the channel rack. I just wanted to quickly show you the main features so I can get you making music as quickly as possible. Okay, so now it seems like a good time to save this project. And to do so, you just need to go over to File and then Save. And I'm just going to call this example. It is a good idea to constantly keep saving as you work through your project. Okay, so as you saw previously, we've created some patterns. So we have a kick and snare, and some chords. So the playlist is an important part of FL Studio. And here we can arrange our patterns. So first of all, I'm just going to make sure our draw tool is selected in our playlist. Okay, so here I have my kick pattern selected, and I'm just going to draw it in into the playlist at the start. Now, if I want to listen to the start of my arrangement, I need to change from pattern mode to song mode. So I just click where it says song. And now if I press play, and you can see there, the playhead is moving along the timeline. Okay, now let's select kick and snare. And I'm just going to draw some of these in. And if you make a mistake, you can always right click to delete. Now if I continue playing the song, we can do so by pressing spacebar. You can see there we have our first pattern and then our second pattern. And I'm also going to draw in our chords part. This time I'm going to select this tool here, the paint tool. So with this I can click and drag to draw in multiple patterns. One thing I'm going to do before I play this back is change the volume of our chords. So in the channel rack we have a volume dial and I'm just going to pull this down. Now let's play this back. Obviously, this isn't much of a song arrangement. I just quickly wanted to show you how you can use your patterns in the playlist. Okay, now we're going to talk about the piano roll, but first of all, I want to make a few quick changes. So this chords part, I'm not too happy with it. I'm actually going to change the instrument and write in a new part. I'm going to choose a new preset for my synthesizer. I'll do so by clicking where it says flex here. So in the synth, we have a few different presets. And let's just click and play through a few of these. So I'm just going to switch over to pattern mode, so I'm only listening to this pattern. Now I'm just going to select a different preset and then press the spacebar. It's not quite what I'm after, so I'm going to have a look at a few others. That's more appropriate. And now I'm going to change the part in the piano roll. Let's click here to open up the piano roll. And I'm just going to delete these notes by right-clicking. You can also right-click and drag to delete multiple notes. Okay, I just zoomed in there by holding Command and scrolling. You can do so as well on Windows by pressing Control and scrolling. In the piano roll, the pitch of the notes is represented vertically, as you can see here with the keyboard at the side. And then time is represented horizontally. And in FL Studio, this is measured in bars. So to draw a note, you just simply click where you'd like to have a note. And to change the size of it, just hover over to the right-hand side and then click and drag to adjust. I'm just going to draw in a few more notes here. And if you make a mistake, you can press undo, which is Command Z on Mac or Control Z on Windows. One thing you'll notice, however, is if you press this twice, it will redo the last mistake. So if you want to undo more than one mistake, press Command Alt Z or Control Alt Z on Windows. You can delete your notes by right-clicking on them, and you can delete multiple notes by right-clicking and dragging. Okay, now I'm just going to draw in a quick chord progression. Pressing Command A will highlight all of your notes, and pressing Command B will duplicate these. You can also duplicate notes by holding Shift and clicking and dragging. You can select multiple notes by holding Command on Mac or Control on Windows and then dragging. To cancel your selection, hold Command on Mac or Control on Windows and then click a free space on the piano roll. So if you don't do this, it will simply draw in an extra note when you click. Okay, so now if I play back my pattern, you'll notice it's 2 bars in length. So if I add a note in bar 3, and now play back the pattern, you'll notice the length of the pattern has extended. Okay, so I actually want to create a 4-bar loop, so I'm going to draw in a few more notes. So now if we play back this pattern, you can see there we have a 4-bar pattern. Okay, so we haven't gone over everything in the piano roll. I just wanted to quickly show you a few of the key features so you can start making music. So we've started creating a very basic arrangement. I'm just going to play it back for you now. Make sure it's on song mode over here, and then play it back. Now I want to quickly show you how the mixer works in FL Studio. To open and hide the mixer, click this button here. So something we didn't go over in the channel rack before is these numbers over here. And what they do is they send a channel from the channel rack to an insert in the mixer. So if I play back this section here of the song, you'll be able to see signal going through some of the inserts. So at the moment, the clap, hat and ride aren't actually playing anything. If you haven't chosen an insert on your channel rack and you see this little dash mark, it means that this channel will go directly to the master output. This is fine, however, you won't be able to process this channel on its own. But if I was to solo this flex instrument here, I can do so by control clicking on this icon here. You'll see that that is coming straight out of the master. And that is this channel here, where it says M. But now if I change this number here, I can send the flex channel to one of the inserts. For example, insert 12, and now if I play this back, you could see there, whenever I changed the number of the channel rack, the signal was coming out of a different insert on the mixer. If I right click on the number, I can then go down to type in value and type in an insert number. Okay, I'm just going to quickly delete the ride symbol as we won't be using it. So right click and go on delete. Okay, I'm just going to unsolo the instrument now and play this back in the mix. So the reason we want to send different channels to different inserts is so we can process them differently, such as adding EQ or reverb. Okay, now what we can do is rename our different inserts in the mixer. So just right click and go to rename. Just so we're more organized, I'm going to rename them the same as what they are in the channel rack. So on each of these individual channels, we have a number of different controls. So for example, here we have the pan dial, which allows us to move something from left to right, and below we have the volume slider. And we can also mute the channel by clicking on this icon here. Remember, if you ever get confused over what something does, you can hover the mouse over it, and in the top left, it will give you a brief description of what it is. So for example, here we have panning, and here we have volume. You'll notice on the right-hand side of the mixer, we have this inspector. And in here, we can add plugins to each of our individual tracks. So for example, if I wanted to add reverb just on the snare, I could select the snare insert, then go over to an empty slot, go to select, and then here I could choose reverb. For this example, Fruity Reverb 2, which is available on all versions of FL Studio 20. And now if we listen back, the snare will have reverb. We also have an equalizer built in on each channel. So as you can see, using the mixer is vital when it comes to mixing your music, as it allows you to process each individual channel differently. There are a lot more features available to us in the mixer, but I'm not going to go over them just yet. In this video, I just wanted to show you the basics so you can get started as soon as possible. Later on, we'll be looking at the mixer in a lot more detail. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick wrap up of what we've gone over so far. So the channel rack stores your instruments and sounds, and you can use the step sequencer and the piano roll to put in your musical information. So the channel rack holds the information for each different pattern. You then arrange these patterns in the playlist to start building a song. Also, all of your channels can be sent to the mixer for different effects and processing. And also the browser on the side allows you to access different files. Okay, so I've only really scratched the surface of FL Studio. I just wanted to show you the basics so you can start making music straight away. So this video has actually been taken from our complete FL Studio course, where we dive a lot deeper into FL Studio. I've co-created this course with Ian Alexander, and you can get full access to this course by checking the link in the description below this video. The next part of this video, Ian Alexander is going to take over and show you a few more basic functions and features of FL Studio. So he's going to show you how to use what you've learned to start making your first song.
Hi there, it's Ian Alexander here. I'm going to continue showing you some of the features of FL Studio and start working on this song. I'm going to change the sound of our kick drum and add in a bass part. So the first thing I want to do is create another drum pattern, and this time introduce some hi-hats. So I'm just going to click on the plus button here and call this kick, snare, hats. I'm just going to give it a color too. Okay, so I'm just going to draw in my simple kick drum beat just by left clicking on each of these steps. Put my snare in as well. This time I'm just going to click and drag to draw in the hi-hat on every beat. I'm just going to go back to pattern mode and listen to this. Okay, that sounds fine, but the hi-hats sound a little bit too consistent. So what I'm going to do is change the velocity of some of the hi-hat notes. This will change the volume of the hi-hats and make it sound a little bit more interesting. So to do this quickly, I can just click on this button here on the channel rack. Now these bars here represent the velocity. So what I'm going to do is just reduce the velocity of every other hi-hat. Right, if I listen back to that now, it just sounds a little bit more interesting. Now I'm just going to draw in this pattern over here. One thing to note, when you're drawing in your patterns, if they're not snapping to the bar like these are, then you just need to enable this icon up here. So if I change this to none, and now I draw in a pattern, you'll see there it's not snapping exactly to the bar. So, in this situation, these would be out of time. So if you ever have any issues where your patterns aren't snapping to the grid, then just make sure you've got this turned on. I tend to leave it at bar, as this means each of the patterns will snap to the bar. I'm just going to delete these ones here. Right, something else I want to do is change the sound of the kick drum, because at the moment I just don't particularly like the sound of that kick. So to do this, all I have to do is drag and drop a sample onto this kick channel. So in the browser, I'm just going to click on this icon up here which says All, go down to Packs, Drums, go into Kicks, and find a kick drum. Okay, I quite like that one, so I'm just going to drag and drop it. Now this channel has a new kick drum sample. One thing I'd like to mention quickly is it doesn't matter which track in the playlist that you paste your patterns onto. So if I was to listen to the drums on this track here, it'd be exactly the same as having them on a different track. What I generally advise you do is use one track for each instrument. But if you've got a slightly different part, you could use a new track. For example here, I had the kick drum on its own on track 1, and then when the next pattern came in, I moved it to track 2. You can arrange these as you like, but for the moment I'm just going to move all the drums onto one track. So to highlight multiple ones, I'm going to hold Command on a Mac or Control on a PC, and then click and drag them upwards. Now I'm just going to draw the kick, snare and hi-hat pattern over here. So I'll just click on this pattern and then paste them in. Right, the next thing I want to do is create a new pattern with a bass part. So I'm just going to click on the plus up here, call this one bass, give it a colour, and hit enter. Now I'm going to add a new channel. So I'll click on this plus button, and again I'm going to go down and choose flex. We're just using flex at the moment as it's a really easy to use synth and has some great sounds. It's also available on all versions of FL Studio 20. Right, I know there's a preset that I like here called Creeper Drone, so I'm just going to select this. I'm going to close the instrument. Right, I'm just going to open up the piano roll by right-clicking on the channel here and clicking on piano roll. Right, I'm just going to quickly draw in the bass part here. I'm going to draw in this note here, C sharp 3. I'm just going to move it so it starts at the beginning of the bar. And now I'm going to stretch it out. I'm just going to draw in another note now. You'll notice there that the length of the note I've drawn in has changed. If I change the length of this note here, and now draw in a new note, it's the same length again. Now, if I click on this longer note, and then draw in a note, the note that you draw in will be the same length as the previous note that you have selected. So this is a really handy feature for when you're drawing in notes. Okay, I'm just going to go back to pattern mode and listen to this pattern. Okay, great. One thing you may have noticed is when I was drawing in those notes, they were snapping to the grid. You can control how the notes snap to the grid with this magnet icon up here. So, just like in the playlist, if I choose none and draw in a note, it won't be snapped to the grid. Now, if I choose a different snap mode, for example bar, you'll see there that all the lines have disappeared. So now it's only going to snap to each bar. In this situation, that is fine. But if I was trying to write in a more intricate part, I wouldn't want this, as I wouldn't be able to draw in fast notes. So what I recommend you do is just leave this on step. This way you can snap to 16th notes. When using the draw tool in FL Studio, you can also quickly copy notes by holding Shift and dragging them across. You'll see there it has duplicated this note. You can also use Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, or on a Mac, Command-C and Command-V to copy and paste. So if I select this note here and press Command-C, I can then press Command-V and paste it. We can see there it hasn't pasted where we want it. So what I often like to do is use the shortcut Command-B, and that just duplicates the note. I'm just going to press Command Z to undo pasting this note. Now I'm quickly going to make a couple of changes in the channel rack. Here I'm going to rename this instrument bass. So I'll right click, go to rename, call it bass. I'm also going to give it a colour. I'd recommend going through and doing this on all your channels to keep things organised. I'm also going to change the mixer output to number 6. So I'll right click, go down to type in value, and write 6. Now I'm just going to select this pattern and paste it into our song. Let's have a listen back. Okay, great. So we've now got a bass part. Obviously, writing in notes is a big part of music production, but recording can be a really quick way to get your ideas down. So there's a couple of different ways you can do this. Firstly, you can just use your computer's QWERTY keyboard to play in musical notes. So, make sure this icon is enabled. Then you can play in musical notes using your computer's keyboard. This is really handy as you don't need anything else. But if you do have a MIDI controller, you can set this up really quickly and it's slightly easier to play a real keyboard. So to do so, plug in your MIDI device into your computer. Then go up to Options and go to MIDI settings. Now, the keyboard I have plugged in is this LPK25. So all you have to do here is just press the Enable button under Input. Now this keyboard is active and I can use it in FL Studio. So if I play notes on my keyboard now, we can hear our bass channel. If you want your MIDI controller to be active on a different track, just select this track here. So you can use your MIDI keyboard to control any of the channels in your channel rack. What I'm going to do now is add a new channel so we can start recording our melody. So I'm going to press the plus button here. I'm going to choose Flex once again. And this time I'm going to choose the preset Chariot Horn. Now I'm going to add a new pattern. Call this Melody. I'm also going to rename it over here. So I'm going to right click, go to rename and colour. Right, there's a few settings which you'll need to change for recording. Firstly, I want to record my ideas into a new pattern. So I'm going to go to pattern mode. When recording, it can be really useful to have a metronome to help keep you in time. To turn on the metronome, click on this icon here. And something else I'd like to do is have a count in. So, if I was to hit record without a count in, it would start recording straight away. Having a count in lets you get a feel for the tempo and gives you a moment to prepare yourself. So, this icon here will give you 1 bar count in before you record. There's a couple of other recording options here, blend recording and loop recording, but we don't need those at the moment, so I'm going to disable them. Okay. Now, when I hit the record button, this dialog box will appear, and it's asking you what you'd like to record. There's a few different options here, but we want to record notes and automation. So I'll select this option. Okay, so now I'm going to press play and record in an idea. Okay, great. Now I've recorded our part in, I'm going to turn off the record button here. So now, when I play back, I can listen to this pattern. It's not perfect, but we can change that. So if we have a look at it up close, we can see here some of our notes are out of time. It's only slightly out of time, but I'd like to correct this. So what we could do is individually move each note. But as you can see there, when we are moving our notes, they're conforming to our snap. At the moment, that is set to step. So 16th notes. If I want to move the notes without them snapping, I can hold Alt and move the notes more finely. So you can see there, I can move it into the correct position. So what holding Alt does is temporarily disables the snap mode. So we could go through and do that for each of our notes individually, but there's a quicker way of putting our notes in time. So a really powerful feature of FL Studio is quantizing. I'm just going to show you a really quick way of doing so. I'm just going to hold Command on a Mac or Control on a PC and select all of the notes. Now if I click on this wrench icon here, I'm going to select Quick Quantize. Now look at the notes carefully when I press this button. You'll see there all of the notes have been snapped to the grid, so if I play it back, you can see there they're almost all perfectly in time. One thing to note, when you're using Quick Quantize, sometimes the notes snap to the wrong position on the grid. So what I'm going to do is just adjust those couple of notes which are in the wrong position. So for example, this note here and this note down here haven't snapped where I would like them to. So I'm just going to move those notes individually. I'm going to deselect all these notes by holding Command on a Mac or Control on a PC and clicking. And now I'm just going to move the note to the right position. Let's have a listen back. Something else you'll be able to notice, when I played those notes in, it's recorded the velocity. So the velocity is how loud the notes are going to be played back. So for example, if I adjust the velocity here, the first note will be very quiet. If I turn it all the way to the top, it'll be a little bit louder. So adjusting velocity gives you more control over how your notes are played back. If you write in MIDI notes, they'll always be at the same velocity. So it can be good to vary these slightly. It gives your music more interest, it can help give it more of a human feel. I'm just going to delete these now. Listening back, I want to change some of the notes in this melody. I'd just like to move these three notes up an octave. So I'm going to select these three notes by holding Command on a Mac or Control on Windows, selecting them, and I'm going to click and drag them up to the position that I'd like. Let's have a listen back. Okay, I like that idea. Now I'm just going to draw this pattern into the song and have a listen to it in the mix. Okay, great. So we've started to build up our song now. So now you know how to set up and record MIDI. One thing I should mention quickly is be careful which snap setting you have on when you quantize your notes. For example, if I had it on bar, and I quantize my notes now, you'll see there all the notes have been snapped to the bar. Obviously, we do not want this, so if this is happening to you, just make sure you change your snap mode to an appropriate setting. I tend to find step or half beat a good place to start. I'm just going to press undo so our melody goes back to the right position. Okay, great. So now you know how to set up and record in MIDI. It's a really important part of music production, and I recommend you spend some time practicing this. Obviously, if you're a beginner, you may find it very difficult to play in time with the metronome. If this is the case, you can always slow down the tempo of your project. To change the tempo of your project, simply right-click on the tempo up here, and then you can choose a tempo. You can also type in a value if you want a specific tempo. Now we've got a few ideas down, we can start turning these into more of a song. So I'm just going to arrange these patterns in the playlist. To full screen the playlist, click on the playlist window and press enter. So we previously recorded our melody, but I'd now like to create another pattern with a slight variation on the melody. So the quickest way to do this is by cloning a pattern. To clone a pattern, simply right-click on the pattern in the pattern picker and go down to clone. Now we've got another pattern here called melody number 2. I'm just going to right-click on this and rename it. I'm going to call it melody variation. Now if I draw that in and listen back, I think I'd like to add in one more note in this pattern here. So to open up the piano roll, I'm just going to double click on the pattern. I'm just going to draw in a C sharp here, and then listen back to it. I'll click on the timeline ruler here so we start playback from bar 9. Okay, great, I'm happy with that. So now let's start arranging the song. I'm just going to close the channel rack for the moment so I can see the pattern picker on the left here. Now I think I want to start the track with the bass and just the kick drum. So I'll select bass in the pattern picker and draw it in. I want the bass to continue throughout the track and then play in the outro section. Another way to select a pattern is simply clicking on one in the playlist. Now I've clicked on chords, I'll be able to paste in the chord pattern. Same with melody. I'm just going to alternate between the melody and the melody variation. And I'm going to draw in the main drum beat for this section here. Okay, let's listen back to this rough arrangement. So I'm going to go back to the start and play from here. I'm also going to turn off the metronome as I don't want to hear it anymore. So I'll just click on this icon at the top. Okay, that's a decent arrangement, but I just want to add in one more part before we start mixing. So I'm going to add a new pattern and call this one pad. I'm going to open my channel rack by clicking on the icon here, adding a new instrument. This time I'm going to use something slightly different. I'm going to use the mini synth. It's just another synthesizer that comes with FL Studio. While I remember, I'm going to choose a mixer insert for the melody and this new pad part. I'm going to rename this one Pad. Now I'm just going to open up the piano roll and draw in a 4-bar pattern. I'm going to drag this so it's a full length. See here, it's not snapping to where I'd like it to, so I'm just going to hold Alt and bring it back slightly. Remember, holding Alt temporarily disables snap. Going to change the length of these two notes. And then shorten these so it's just a 4-bar pattern. We'll go back to pattern mode and listen to that. Cool, that all sounds fine. Now I'm just going to draw this into our song. I'm just going to add it into the latest section of the song where it builds up a bit. Okay, now we've got all our parts in, let's start the mixing process. I'm just going to minimize the playlist by pressing enter. Now I'm going to make sure we have our session organized nicely so we can mix the track. Here, for example, I haven't named this channel appropriately, it's just called Flex. So I'm just going to rename this and call it Chords. I'll do the same in the mixer. One thing I'd like to show you quickly is a handy tip for linking the channel rack with the mixer. So if I select the channel that I'd like to link up, go down to the insert and right click here, I can go to channel routing and select route selected channels to this track. Now it's copied the colour and the name onto this insert. I'll do the same for the melody. And finally the pad. Make sure when you're doing this you have the right channel selected. Okay, great. Everything is nice and clear now. So the first thing I'm going to do is set the levels so we have all the tracks at an appropriate volume. So I'm just going to play back the song and adjust the volume sliders on some of these tracks. Okay, that seems fine. Now I'm going to use some panning to widen the stereo image of the track. So for example, I'm going to pan the chords partially to the left and the pad over to the right. Now, something we looked at before was adding reverb to the snare. But I want to do the same for the pad part. So I'm going to select the pad insert, go to the first plugin slot, go to select, and I'll choose Fruity Reverb 2. Now something else that I recommend you doing when you're mixing is using EQ. In FL Studio, we have this 3-band equalizer on each channel of the mixer. So I can really quickly and easily add EQ to each of my individual channels. First of all, I'd like to EQ the snare slightly differently. can either click on the graph or use these sliders here to make adjustments. I feel like the kick drum has quite a lot of high frequency content, so I'm just going to bring that down. I feel like the pad also has a similar issue, so I'm going to cut out some of the high frequencies here, and I also want to cut out some of the low frequencies. And finally, I want to make the melody a little bit brighter and more upfront in the mix, so I'm just going to boost the high frequencies a bit. There's obviously far more that we could do, but I don't have time to cover mixing in this short crash course. So just remember, when you're using the mixer, select the channel that you'd like to work on, and then you can add in your plugins or use the EQ. Every single channel in the mixer has its own set of plugins. One other thing I'd like to mention: when you're mixing in FL Studio, I tend to like to make all of my adjustments within the mixer rather than in the channel rack. As you may remember from before, you can actually pan and adjust the volume of your tracks in the channel rack. However, I find for a mixing workflow, it's much better to just work on your tracks in the mixer. So when you're happy with your mix, you might want to release your song or show it to some friends or family. So what you need to do is export your song into a stereo file so anyone can listen to it on any computer or device. So I'm just going to take you through the steps so you can export your song. So the first thing you need to do is create a cycle region on the area of the track that you would like to export. So in this situation, I want to export the whole song. To create a cycle region, go to the timeline ruler at the top here, hold Command on a Mac or Control on Windows, then click and drag. So I have the whole length of the track selected now. However, I wouldn't recommend ending your cycle region at this point here. This is because sometimes you may have reverbs in your track. For example, we have reverb on the snare, and this reverb tail will ring on for a moment or two. So just make sure you allow a bit of time at the end of your track to let everything fade to silence. I'm just going to give it 2 bars, as this should be sufficient. So I'm going to hold Control on a PC or Command on a Mac, then click and drag and create my cycle region again. Now, what we need to do is go up to File and go down to Export. Here we have a few different audio file types. The most common are WAV and MP3. WAV files are higher quality, but they take up more memory. MP3 files are smaller, however they're not quite as high quality as WAV file. So I'd recommend choosing WAV file. Now we can give it a name. I'm just going to leave it as example, and we can choose where we want to export it. I'm just going to put it on the desktop for now. Leave the file format as .wav, as this is a WAV file, and then hit save. Now this box of options will open up, however the default settings are absolutely fine to use. So I'll just press start. You'll see the progress bar at the bottom. Then FL Studio will make that noise once the song has exported. Now I'm just going to minimize FL Studio and go to my desktop. And here we can play our song. Okay, so that's the end of this video, and I hope you found this crash course useful. Obviously, we've only just scratched the surface of FL Studio and shown you the very basics so you can create a song and export it.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope now you're a lot more confident at using FL Studio. So this video was actually taken from our complete FL Studio 20 course. So if you'd like to continue learning with us, then be sure to check out this complete course in the link below this video.